baby trees.
Bonsai. Bonsai.
Bonsai. Bonsai.
Close enough.
The Black Pondo Podcast.
Bonsai. Bonsai.
Bonsai.
Bonsai. Bonsai.
Bonsai.
Yeah.
The Black Pondo Podcast.
Would you tell me a little bit about the drying process and what that looks like?
Wood? Well, yeah. I mean, so when you take the tree down, I get this all the time, and this is like red flag number one when shopping with a new wood guy is, you'll get some boards, and he'll be like, "Oh, they're dry. The tree was down for 2 years, 5 years before I cut it." But essentially, when the tree comes down, the general rule of math is it takes a year for every inch of thickness for that wood to dry in the air. So if you imagine a tree that's 24 inches across, um, in 5 years, it's not even close. It hasn't even moved the needle. I mean, it's almost as wet as it was the day it came down. So generally speaking, you take the tree down. I like to cut it in the slabs as soon as possible from that point because once it does start to dry, it shrinks at different rates. Each of those concentric rings is moving at a different rate. That's why a lot of trees you see when you're hiking or around that are in the round form still are starting to crack open, because that's them relieving that pressure from the shrinkage at different rates. And so you can imagine if you were to slice boards of that, they're going to also be just broken up and cracked. So when you get it flat, that varying drying rates will warp the board, but it's not opening up the boule or however you pronounce that of the log, the round. So getting them flat can mitigate that breakage to a large extent. And then at that point, it's essentially a year an inch of thickness. So a 2-inch board, you would expect 2 years outdoors. Under cover, you want good airflow, but you don't want sun on it because the sun's going to strip the moisture from the outside faster than the inside, and then again create that imbalance in drying, causing the outside to open up and crack, whereas the inside isn't moving. So you want cover over it. It can get wet in a fashion, but you don't want standing water because then you're going to develop rot at that point. Um, and that gets you down to kind of like a 12% point, at least in our part of the world. Different relative humidities are going to take you to different places. So if I'm drying wood in Arizona, I'll probably get down to 6% relative humidity. Here in the Pacific Northwest, 12 is the best we can do. Um, and at that point, taking it to a kiln can take it down that little extra bit. And there's different kinds of kilns. Some activate via heat. Some are dehumidifier kilns, so they're just removing moisture from the space. But generally speaking, you'll put it through that process, and that'll take it down to an 8, 9%. 7, 8, 9 is your general working percentage of kiln dried wood. And then that'll fluctuate too, because it continues to gain and lose moisture. Just kind of hits this equilibrium where it's not really continuing to precipitously drop and lose moisture. It's just kind of like hovering at whatever the relative humidity is. As the winter comes in, it'll lose moisture as the air can't hold, cold air can't hold moisture in the same way that warm air can. And as the summer comes on, it'll gain. Um, so you kind of get that little fluctuation. Um, and then basically the kiln drying process kind of bakes in this kind of bracket. Like air dried wood, they like to use that for steam bending because it can still kind of ramp up. You can kind of saturate it more, whereas kiln dried wood kind of bakes the cellular structure in a way that it really can't take in a ton more moisture. So you kind of holds it at a lower level and also kills the bugs, which can be advantageous in a lot of cases.
Nice.
So it's a process. I mean, from log drop to usable lumber, 2 to 3 years is pretty common.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, does the thickness matter a lot? And I'm very ignorant on this subject, but during COVID, I had a lot of extra time on my hands, so I got into Jita creation, and I wasn't actually cutting them myself. I had somebody that would cut maple burl for me, and I would finish them just for fun, just to create a few for myself. And what I found is a lot of them actually ended up warping. They were fairly thin. Does that probably mean that the wood was just not dry enough? Is that
But when it wouldn't be dry when you cut it. No matter when no matter how dry you get that burl, really, when you cut it, there's gonna be a warpage. I mean, not only from the moisture, but you're also imagine if, like, if you're holding your arm out and holding a kettlebell, you're
okay?
having to exert tension in that arm to support that weight. And parts of the arm are pulling and parts of the arm are pushing to support the weight. So imagine a tree is the same way, you know, parts are holding up branches. So there's all these kind of interior tensions that are in equilibrium as the tree is intact and alive, as they're supporting different things. And when you cut it up, you're isolating different areas of kind of different
Mm,
tension and different kind of resistance. And so that causes all those what was once in balance to kind of start to shift, and it causes those cells to kind of move as they reach a different equilibrium within their new isolated kind of board form. And then also it does cause the moisture levels to fluctuate, which is going to cause movement as well. So nearly any time, even if I were to take a kiln dried board and rip it down the middle, I generally expect a small degree of movement in that board, as they kind of reorientate that kind of equilibrium that was established in that one board. So it's always a good idea when you're like cutting up anything to cut oversize and then leave it. If it's already been kiln dried and it's the wood's pretty much dry, leaving it for a week or 2 weeks is usually enough for itself to reacclimate and kind of shake out all those little equilibrium issues and reach a new state of stasis, and then you can kind of flatten it at that point. If you're cutting it wet, you might have to leave it for a year or 2 to achieve the
mhm.
same kind of act. But yeah, you're always going to experience some degree. Burls can be a little more fluid in that sense because burl grain is just kind of a knot of grain. Sometimes it's very stable. Sometimes you get a lot of in grain, which isn't going to move much because there's not a lot of grain passing through. I mean, imagine if these are all your cells and you're cutting off just a small section of them, there's a lot less of the kind of grain running through the board to move and fluctuate. Whereas if it's long and you're isolating this whole section and getting all that grain, there's more of it to move and lose moisture through. But at the same time, it's that kind of irregular grain of pearls. It's a crapshoot as far as what comes out the other side.
Mm.
Generally, when I'm cutting Jitas, if I'm going on the thin ones, I'm probably cutting them about a half an inch to 3/8 of an inch, kind of depending on my faith in the material, and then taking them down to a quarter. So I'm almost double the size I want to finish at when I'm cutting them,
Ah,
just to ensure. And even then, I don't always get a Jita out of it. There's been many times when I've cut at a half an inch and had to throw the piece away because I can't even get a quarter inch flat out of that piece, just because it moves so much. And then
yeah.
each species has its like oak is notorious for being extremely temperamental, very difficult to dry, high movement, just a very unsettled wood. Will move a lot. Maple's kind of in the middle. Walnut's pretty reliable, pretty easy. It doesn't move a ton. Mahogany is one of the like primo stable woods out there. That's why you see a lot of guitars made from mahogany, because it is so stable. And then back in the day before they had really plywood, when they were doing veneer work, they would build the substrate out of mahogany because of that stability. It was kind of like the most um, stable substrate that people could get their hands on before they had kind of manufactured wood. So yeah, it's kinda you have to kinda learn the temperament. Same in bonsai, you have to learn the temperament of all these trees Some like to collect, some never collect, some you can collect in the fall, some, and you have to kind of learn what each one will tolerate, and then you can kind of attack each species with that in mind, and do your kind of best practices where you can't ever guarantee success, but you can kind of hedge your bets to where, success is more probable than not in terms of how you approach it, you know? Um, so yeah, that's the short answer. Uh,
Oh man,
we
it's
could probably spend the rest of the podcast getting down into the nitty-gritty on that one.
yeah.
Um, and a lot of
What?
that's just hand-on experience.
Yeah, yeah. It seems endlessly complex to me. There's so much to learn, so much to
That's kind
know.
of the beauty of it, though. That's really what got me into woodworking is that complexity and that diversity of behavior and that nuance. I think if every wood was the same, I probably wouldn't be doing this. It just wouldn't have the appeal. So, there's a beauty to that complexity.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, Austin, thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me. I really appreciate it. Uh,
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Would you tell us a little bit about what's been going on in your life and the recent surgery that you had? If there's anything you don't want to talk about, that's totally cool. I want to make sure
I
that
think there's a
I'm
few things your listeners don't want to hear about, but uh, I had 2, and my medical terminology pronunciation's not great, I'm not a doctor, 2 inguinal hernias, which is where your intestines, poke out of your core, your core muscles, your abs, little kind of breaches in the muscle allows your intestines to kind of pop out. They're not incredibly dangerous to have, but you do run the risk that it can get pinched and cut off the blood circulation to your intestines, which that can be critical. The doctor told me when we first diagnosed the hernia 2 years ago at this point, that it was kind of a 15-minute window if it got pinched. Like you need to be at the emergency room
Oof.
15 minutes or it's going to be real bad news.
Yikes.
Um, so it's not fun to live with that. And it does mean, when you're lifting heavy objects, I've had to wear a hernia belt, which is essentially a jock strap that pushes your intestines back into your body. Because when you lift with your diaphragm, you tend to force it out more, which can aggravate the opening and enlarge it, which you don't really want to do. So it's been 2 years now of wearing a hernia belt in the shop, and finally the stars aligned, and I was able to get the procedure done to fix both of those guys. And what they do is they sew a mesh over that opening in your abs, and then your body kind of grows into the mesh and kind of seals it. So it basically forms one with your body. But that process takes about 3 weeks. And over the course of that 3 weeks, I am under a lifting limit of 5 to 10 pounds. And the risk being, if I lift over that, I can bust off that mesh and it was all for nothing. Um, so yeah, I've kind of had to organize my spring, where I'm, woodworking 5 to 10 pounds ain't gonna get you much. No.
Now,
So it's been pretty much a work halt now. I'm about a week and a half in. I've
how
seen
did
everything.
how
How
did
do
this
I
happen? Before you
Right.
tell me, I'm I'm picturing you carrying some massive tree around, uh, like a massive log that you just chopped down, and or I think you were telling me your sister is a professional wrestler. Did
She
you get in
is.
the ring and mix it up with her, or what happened? How'd this
No,
happen?
I mean, it's nothing that, like, you wish it was that spectacular. I mean, I lift heavy stuff every day. I mean, you can do it on 80 pounds. Get a little, you know, kinda health classy about it. I guess men are more susceptible to hernias than women. because during the infant period, we have a natural opening in our abdominal lining that our testicles drop through that then reseals afterwards. But because it's already that opening, even though it reseals, it's just easier for it to open up again. And then it's kind of genetic. My dad had one, my grandpa had one. So I was already predisposed to have it, before I ever lifted anything in my life. Um, if I had to point the finger, I think I was doing a door for Ryan Neal that involved a large quarter-inch steel panel in it, so it was stupid heavy. I mean, it was a solid core slab door with, probably 100 pounds, maybe a little over, and I think over the process of flipping it and manipulating it, building it, I noticed a change one day.
Uh,
Um It if I didn't make that door, it would have probably been something else, maybe one
yeah.
of your stands. Who knows? Um, you know, any number of slabs I've lifted over the years. So it happens. I was on a walk this morning and I ran into my neighbor. He's going in for his hernia surgery next week.
uh,
It's kinda like, you too." And able
yeah.
to give him a little bit of the lay of the land. Over social media, you'd be surprised, a lot of, people have commented they've had 3 hernias over the course of their lives, and it's not an uncommon. In fact, actually, it is the most common surgery in America, by the numbers. So, there's a lot of us out there. um, it's not the biggest deal. It does decimate your core afterwards. My wife has been really enjoying it because she's been telling me now I know what it feels like to have childbirth, that little after effect when there's just the core is just blown out and gone after pregnancy. It's kind of that process. The first couple of days, you're using your forearms to do everything, to move about, and that was very uncomfortable. And then there can be a quite a bit of bruising and swollen afterwards, which has kind of been what's been plaguing me lately. Um, so it hasn't been a cakewalk. It's like a vacation of sorts, but then at the same time, I haven't been outside at all, hardly. I've been confined to the couch with my feet up, which is not what I consider a vacation,
Sounds like
at
the worst
all.
kind of vacation to me.
It kind of is. It's driving me nuts. The good news is I have a few fossil concretions that I weighed prior to the surgery that all kinda came in 2, 3 pounds, and so I've been able to kind of noodle at those a little bit after the first probably 4 or 5 days when I was able to get myself to the garage and move about. But even that, 30 minutes of sitting in a chair upright really starts to get sore. So I haven't even been that productive in that respect. Week and a half in, things are starting to come down a little bit. I'm starting to hit the real danger zone where you're feeling better, completely restless, and ready to just go do shit. And this is where you kill it, where you blow it out.
For
You
sure.
know?
You gotta be careful. You
I
gotta
got a week and
lay
a half
low,
left till I'm cleared.
relax.
I know. So I gotta be
Yeah.
real good. I've got a crunch job that's gotta be done June 1st after this, so I gotta come back with a vengeance. So any
Okay.
delay in the healing, and I'm gonna really give myself some trouble, later. So I'm being very good, but that's not something I'm good at.
Can you tell me anything about the crunch job, or is this held
I
tight?
don't think it's I don't think it's anything too secretive. It's actually, I'm very excited about it. I was worried I was gonna lose the job because of the time frame. The client initially wanted it done mid-April, and the surgery was already booked, and I was like, "Look, it can't happen." He had reached out. It was like a 3-week window, and I'm like, "I just can't do it in 3 weeks." But it's someone who owns a Frank Lloyd Wright house, in the Chicago area, and there
No
was
way.
initially I know, it just gets better. Um, and there was initially a planter in an island in kind of the main room, and he wants to modify it where he wants to cover the planter and put in a kind of permanent Shohin display, in
Wow.
space with the planter in the Frank Lloyd Wright house. So we're making a quasi-traditional Shohin display that kind of reflects the architecture of the Frank Lloyd Wright house to kind of essentially integrate with the space as if it was designed to go there instead of the planter. Kind of the lab redux. I couldn't believe it when I got the email. Um, but yeah, really sweet job.
That
So,
is
I
so
told
cool.
him, like, I really would hate to see a timeline kill this. So this is fun, something I would really enjoy to do. And I was like, is there any way we can
Yeah,
come up with a compromise where, we can make this happen? And so we were able to bump the due date out to June 1st. And I was like, it's tight, but feasible. So, I gave a little, he gave a little, and it hopefully we'll get it done. We're gonna do it in 2 parts, so it's gonna have the Shohin box stand, and then with an accompanying kind of, small stand to go with that to give it a little asymmetry. It's an 8-foot long space where the planter was, so just a single box stand felt very isolated in that space, it just really didn't fill it. So having the extra accompanying stand kinds of gives it a little more, room to fill up the space. So I was able to get that stand done before I went into the surgery. So I can at least focus when I get out of this and get the final piece done without having to juggle 2 at the same time.
that
But
is
it's a
so cool.
it's a cool project, and, designing it to match the house has been a lot of fun, employing a few tricks and kind of altering the design slightly from what, the house features. But the island has this kind of, like, slatted kind of look to it. It has, like, these slats of wood, but when you translate that into a bonsai scale, you don't get the same shadow effect that you get on a, architectural scale. So we were gonna use some oxidation where we blacken the wood in the recessed areas, to kind of force those shadows, kinda like in model making where you paint the shadows because it's not big enough to actually create them on their own. So it's gonna have this kind of black and mahogany banding that's gonna kinda echo the kinda shadow of the mahogany, um, island that it's on. So pretty cool, little project there. Looking forward to getting back to it.
Yeah, can't wait to see that. What,
Yeah.
so is the stand made out of mahogany? And then is a Frank Lloyd, what kind of wood is it in a Frank Lloyd Wright home
The
traditionally?
home is
And
mahogany, in this
wow,
home. I think Frank Lloyd
okay,
Wright,
jeez,
differed depending on the home. The stand's
for
actually
sure.
gonna be done in sapele. There's a builder that's making a cover to cover the planter, and they're gonna be doing the finishing work so it all matches. So it was important to use a similar wood species as they were
Absolutely.
using. That way their finishing stains and dyes would translate 1 to 1 into my work. The house is probably Honduran mahogany. That would be more typical of the time period and is kind of the more prized, mahoganies. If I had my druthers, I would have done the piece in, Honduran mahogany. It does darken with, sun exposure and time, so anything new I would make out of Honduran would be a tad bit lighter, but I think it would develop a patina similar to the home in time, and I would my preference is to take the slow game and, have it match in 15 years versus match immediately. But I do understand the desire and need to get it there in a quicker pace. So, I have no problem with the sapele, other than it's a kind of shitty wood to work. It's very splintery, and so it's just been peppering my hand with splinters. It's kind of a dry, brittle wood and chips out very easily. So milling the boards, I was just constantly pulling shards out of my hands. It's like woodworking with glass or something. Um, so that was not the funnest. Mahogany works a lot more, smoothly and, is a lot more, well behaved in terms of, a woodworking medium. But
Yeah.
sapele is still a nice, pretty wood. So yeah, it'll look hopefully pretty damn good when it's all said and done with.
Ah, that's so cool. I am so pumped for you, and I can't wait to see pictures, but I feel like that's the kind of thing
Yeah.
that if you could see it in person, it would just
Well,
be
yeah. I
the
mean, in
coolest thing
person, it
ever.
will
But
obviously have a higher degree of, presence, especially since it's gonna kinda be like a space divider, like it's going to kinda partition 2 spaces, but then have that kinda perforated
yeah,
see-through feel. So almost a screen, but screen with bonsai, rather than the one-sided traditional Shohin view, you're gonna get a double-sided take on this thing.
totally.
But I do can't wait to see the install shots. That's gonna be really awesome to see when it's said and done with.
Ah, so exciting. Yeah, I
So, yeah,
guess, yeah, another project I'm really excited about is the stand that you are making for me.
yeah, which is essentially done. The finish could probably use a spit shine and a cleanup and the final kind of buffing, layer. That was another thing I was frantically trying to get done before the surgery, and got close, but it was just kinda one of those things that it just didn't quite make the end. So yeah, I mean, shortly after I'm back up and running, that's gonna be ready to get to you, which will be awesome, and hopefully fuel costs will come down between now and then anyway, and save some money on that, because the fuel surcharges can make shipping less fun. Um, but, that walnut that thing's made out of is, shit. One hell of a walnut. That stuff's
Yeah,
pretty damn nice.
I feel like,
So,
you when you were first telling me about the walnut, you definitely didn't explain how nice it was. I feel like you almost kind of like, said that
did I underplay it?
you did, I think you did, and then I saw pictures of it and I was like, "Wow, that far exceeded
Well,
my expectations." So, I appreciate that,
under
thank you.
promise and over deliver. That's always a decent way to go. I had my suspicion. I mean, to go back to our early conversation about the drying of the wood, when the wood dries, over those 3 years, it gets a patina and really fogs out any real sense of what the grain looks like, and there's clues in that you learn over the years, and you can kind of understand a little bit what's underneath that, but it's kinda like looking into an ocean above the waves. It's like, if you know enough
Mm,
stuff, you can kinda know what's down there, but until you get in the glass bottom boat, you don't really see what you're looking at. And there were hints of figure in that wood that I saw was there, so that was exciting. Hints of color variation that I could see, so that was certainly an optimistic thing. Um, but once the planer hit that and got it smoothed out, all of that just kind of like exploded.
yeah,
And, it's a 9 out of 10 color, it's an 8 out of 9 figure, it's up there, it is some pretty nice stuff, and just clean and straight, it's pretty damn nice walnut.
love
It's
it.
high up there on my esteem. So, yeah, that's gonna be a real looker, and then the manzanita flash, I'm glad you decided that that was a good idea because I think that just really takes it, and there's already the kind of the red in the walnut and the color variation. So I think those 2 just are gonna play with each other so well.
Oh,
Very
great.
excited to see the tree on that. That's gonna be a real pretty thing.
Me
So,
too, I can't
we got
wait.
a lot of
Uh,
shows coming up, which is going to be very exciting. So, definitely something to look forward to in the bonsai world. It's gonna be a busy '27.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so are you available for custom orders still? And kind of like, let's say, I assume probably PBE is gonna be a big driver in producing new works for you. Are you
I would expect
still
so.
taking orders?
I'm still taking orders, but that timeline is quickly diminishing. I would say at this point, I'm pretty much booked out July, and I'm in conversations with a few people for other things, so there's potential for that to go further. The other day, I did the math and, optimistically, I would say probably there's room for 8 stands between now and the PBE. Um, and that is kind of looking at things right now. If somebody decides they want a table between now and then, that number drops to maybe 4. So I know the PBE is definitely going to be notifying people a little bit on the late side as far as acceptance goes. Um, but I would definitely say that, if your tree's good enough and you feel good enough about your tree to enter it into the show, um, maybe it's a good idea to already start to develop and lock down that display, because even if it isn't accepted into the show, it'll be accepted into the next show or the next show. I mean, it's not like this is going to be the last thing that tree will see. And, if it's at the caliber where you're happy to put it forward as a contestant, I think maybe it deserves to kind of finalize and round out the display. Because once we get to that point, I forget, do you know when the acceptances are coming out for the PBE? When are they releasing those? I feel like it
Uh,
was
I'm
July
not
or August, like,
sure.
kinda late in the game. If the
Well,
show's February,
yeah, and I
but
heard
what
they're even pushing it back further this year. And I
they
actually I don't know all the updates, but last time I checked, I spoke with Jonas very briefly, and he was telling me that they were considering pushing it back further. I don't know if that actually happened or not. I thought it was like, and I don't want to say the wrong dates for anyone
yeah,
listening out there, but I thought he said they were going to do it in like October or something, like
see,
very
yeah,
close
and
to the
that's what
show.
happened last year with the National. Bill, I think, did it 6, 8 weeks before the show, um, and at that point, there's scarcely time for 1 or 2
Yeah,
stands, if any. I had to say no to people, before the National because it was just too late. Um, and then hence, why, I'm saying this because I don't love saying no to people. Um, but 6 weeks just isn't enough.
totally.
Generally speaking, I'm a 12-week lead time. Sometimes I can get it done a little faster if it needs to get done a little faster. Um, but when you throw volume at that, you can't do a rush order on 8 stands. It's not going to happen. So 1 or 2 people maybe squeak in if they're lucky. Um, but very much you're kind of out of luck at that point. So if you're really looking for, something exceptional to display your tree on, now is the time to really start that conversation. And like I said, if it's good enough for the show to enter, it's going to be in a show one day, whether it gets in or not. Um, so
100%. Yeah, no,
there's
absolutely. I am anyone out there listening, if you were thinking about entering into the PBE or any other show and you feel pretty good about your chances of getting in, you need to contact Austin right away. Don't rush him. You don't want to give him less time and come up with a worse result, rushing things like
Yeah, it comes down to where it's just I say, "I'm sorry. I can't," you know, and I don't know what you do then. You scramble and go find something at the club, and it doesn't fit right, and, it's a disappointing display at the end of or, I don't know, it's not what you want it to be. It may
totally.
come out fine. I don't know, but yeah, it won't be the vision that maybe you had in mind. Um, but, any tree good enough for the PBE is gonna be good enough for the next, gonna be good enough for the national. There's, the Central Bonsai Expo again this year too. We're in '27, so, I mean, shows are abounding. Um, so they'll be the day. Um,
For sure.
but and
What
honestly, I think the display's as much for you as it is for the show. So, if you wanna see your tree at its best, invest in it
Absolutely.
for yourself. I'm
Absolutely.
sorry I interrupted you there.
No, 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 no. Uh where was I going with that? uh, yeah, I guess I am wondering, what does it look like? What does the process usually look like if someone wants to work with you? like, how do you recommend they reach out, and do they need to have a design in their mind finalized to work with you, or kind of what does that process look like typically? I know what it's looked like for me. I'm just curious with other
Yeah,
people.
I mean, there's a million and one ways we can address it. You don't have to have a finalized design. I'm happy to help you with the design. All I think you really need to come with is kind of an idea of it. If you wanna lead the design, that's great, but you will need a finalized design at that point or some idea of a design. If you're comfortable, passing that on to me, I am happy to design that for you. But generally speaking, just an email, reaching out, kind of initiating that contact. You can contact me through my website, austinheitzmanfurniture.com. Send me an email through there. Generally speaking, I'm gonna wanna see a picture of the tree. Even if you have an idea of the design, I'm kinda gonna wanna see a picture of the tree, because it will inform the minutia of the decisions that I'm gonna have to make as I construct a stand, and even if I'm just crafting something that you've delineated, I'm still gonna have to make the decisions, and seeing the tree is really gonna help inform those. But then general dimensions are always handy too, width, depth, height of pot, because the pot's gonna kinda just determine what that central picture window entails. And then height and width of the crown of the tree, the overall height and width, which is gonna kinda delineate where the outside of the stand falls. I mean, those are your 2 kind of stand parameters, outside line of the stand, picture window of the stand. And so the pot and the crown dimensions are really going to inform where those sit. Um, if it's a heavy tree and we're pursuing a unconventional cantilever or imbalanced design, a general weight at that point sometimes can be handy. Your tree, for instance, is quite the bruiser. And so even though we weren't really pushing the balance or pushing the kind of engineering of the stand in any real way, um, what was it, 270 pounds, right? Am I
Yeah,
correct? That kind of weight.
277 without
Yeah, that
being
kind
watered, so
exa exactly. That kind of weight really needs, that informs decisions, Any stand that you make for a 270-pound thing, that does change the game a little bit. I had to get 2 people to stand on your stand to check it out and make sure that everything was good on the construction side.
and it
Normally
lasted?
I'll Oh, yeah, no problem. Didn't even groan. Um, Good news about walnut is it's strong. Um, but yeah, generally speaking, I'll stand on the stand to check for weight. It's been the first time ever for a bonsai that I've had to have help because I'm not big enough to get that weight check. Um, but yeah, once you reach out with that, if you have a general idea of where you want that budget to fall, that's good to know. I know everybody wants a deal, but these are custom made pieces. These aren't resold products. So the whole idea of a deal doesn't really fit into it. What you're paying for is my time, and more money, more time, less money, less time. So there's no real deal in that. But when it comes down to designing and conceptualizing a stand idea, it just helps me focus and save time on the front end. So I'm not designing, an expensive stand for someone who just really doesn't want to put that kind of investment into it, or likewise designing a simple stand for someone who wants something more complex. But just kind of understanding where you want to fall. And then we can kind of tailor the design to fit that budget. I'm not opposed to working on any level. A lot of people get really afraid that it's just going to be cost prohibitive, but it's really kind of designed to suit the needs of both the tree, the client, and the budget. And so, kind of understanding, and it doesn't have to be a number, this is where it has to be, but a general range of, where you kind of tap out at. It's good to know. So I can kind of work to tailor to that. Um, but outside of
Yeah.
that, that's enough to get things moving. And then from that point, a lot of times I like to have a phone conversation to kind of just get a sense of the other party, their design, their feelings. Even if I'm coming up with the design, it's for someone else, and everyone else has their aesthetic preferences. So it's good to kinda know where they're coming from and kinda get a feeling of just the whole situation. Um, and then from there, we'll develop some sketches, um, and kinda once we have sketches, then we can start putting a price tag on things because we know what actually is involved at that stage of the game. And once the design looks good and the price looks good, 50% deposit gets the ball rolling, and
Solid.
12 weeks later, you have a stand, to put a tree on. So, it's definitely not fast food, um, but this is something, that you hope to live and grow with. So, I guess speed isn't really the goal here,
And you'll
unless it's
probably
6
keep
weeks to
forever.
showtime.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it'll last forever. It's up to you in the end whether or not you wanna commit to it forever, but I would hope so. If not you, hopefully someone else, as it kinda goes through the life of the tree. Um, and then it doesn't necessarily have to be this case for one stand, one tree either. I think that's another common misconception is that every stand's built for one tree only, um, and that's it. Um, and a lot of times, you may have a certain tree you're entering in the show, um, but if budgetarily you kinda wanna have something that's a little more flexible and you can display other trees on, I can kinda ask like, "Well, what other trees in your garden kind of fit into that similar size range?" And we can kinda size the stand as a more generalist that kind of fits 5 trees well, and it may not be an Italian boot for every one of them, but will work, and function, for a diverse array of trees, and so you can kinda get a little more mileage out of it in terms of display, and display multiple trees on the same piece. So that's certainly something definitely to consider.
Fantastic. Well, I really enjoyed and I want to thank you for just the collaborative process that we had together. I feel like, I came with some ideas. I was kind of all over the place. You helped me rein it in a little bit. You shared some of your own ideas. We both thought about it for a while. We made small adjustments and then we figured out something in the end that I think we're both very happy with. And I can say I'm beyond excited and happy with the final product from what I've seen so far. The pictures look awesome, but they always look even better in person. So I think
They do.
it,
What
yeah,
what
it
what
does
like
look better.
wood likes light, and having dynamic light on wood is always gonna look better than a static photo. So when you really get the depth of it. So yeah, it's pretty sweet in person. But yeah, no, thanks. It's a great process to go through. I enjoy it. Um, and it's a fun game to play. And I enjoy working with people on that level, and trying to kind of collaborate to come up with something that satisfies, basically three parties, me, the client, and the tree, to get it to work for everyone.
That's fantastic. When did you start doing the green felt cloths, the coverings for the tables? I really like those, and the ones that I have currently, or the one that I have currently, it's just been really nice to keep dust off the tables, and I think it looks really nice. How'd that start?
Yeah. Well, it kinda comes out of the whole, the Kiribako Japanese box, scenario, and the Jitas, making the felt pouches, for the Jitas is just kind of a convenient storage. I mean, the nature of bonsai display is these stands are stored for long periods, um, and so they kind of solves that convenient issue of, how do I protect them over time? It also presents a nice kind of packaging branding, opportunity, as well, um, and just kind of a nice final touch, to the product. So I think the Jita's largely, kind of started that process, and then it kind of morphed into working onto the stands as well, and it also allows me to kind of include that as just kind of a base, fare. The boxes, because of the material and time investment, I have to charge extra to include those, but the felt cover, accomplishes the same task, by and large, and does so, at a very reasonable and, inclusive kind of rate. I will say the green felt has been controversial. Some love it, some don't. I thought it was a cool color. On my next roll of fabric, I went something a little more, I guess, conservative, not quite that green. Um, I like green. I like more intense greens, so to say. So I thought that one was pretty cool. The next roll, I think I got a gray. So sorry for those who like cream. It may come back again. But a little bit of pushback is just kind of best to just not push it too hard because you risk if you upset one person, it just doesn't work. Um, so yeah, it phased out the green. But yeah, thanks. I'm glad that they work. Um, it's just, yeah, a nice way of kind of protecting the stand over the long haul, transporting the shows, storing in the closet, whatever. So
Do you
kind
have
of form and function.
yeah. Any other tips in regards to storing and keeping the stand in good condition just over the life of the stand?
I mean, obviously, covering, protecting is important. I think humidity, moisture control is very handy. Better to store in a climate controlled facility rather than an outbuilding or shed, if at all possible. Um, if you're storing outdoors in a shed, an enclosed shed is going to be better than an open air shed. Basically, every layer of insulation you can give yourself from the outdoor environment. Obviously, these things, generally speaking, I do make outdoor stands, but by and large, the indoor stands, you don't want them out in the full elements, sun, rain, that's very detrimental to wood. Um, and then also just that kind of humidity fluctuation is going to cause it to move more. So the finish, other than making it look beautiful, one of the benefits of finish is it flatlines that humidity fluctuation. It acts as an inhibitor, slowing down the absorption and emission of moisture. And so you go from graph doing this of moisture to something a little more level, and that just stresses joints less. It causes gaps to move less, and it just benefits the life of the piece. Um, so yeah, if you're, like I have my garage is not climate controlled, but it's enclosed and it's insulated. So, my house would be number one, my garage would be number two, and then I have a shed that has a peaked roof with open sides. And I would say that would be, the least beneficial, least good option, just because it's getting the full brunt of the seasonal change in humidity. Um, and then just avoid harsh cleaning chemicals and harsh cleaning pads. Don't use a scouring pad to clean it. A clean, soft rag with a mild soap is all you really need as far as cleaning it, and that all those abrasives will reduce the finish over time and scratch it. Um,
What kind of soap?
just any, just a mild soap, hand washing soap. Just, something that's just very gentle. You don't need anything crazy.
Okay.
Um, if it's
Uh,
good enough for your skin, it's good enough for the wood, and, these things aren't gonna be getting caked on
yeah.
junk, I would say, a dial, or equivalent is enough to cut, maybe you get some pine sap on it. That would be kind of what I would imagine to be the worst you would encounter. And that should cut through that okay, you know?
Yeah.
And avoid standing water for extended periods if at all possible. Again, the finish is there to really kinda do a lot of that lifting for you, but a puddle of water for 24 hours is not ideal, you
Yeah.
know? Um, I
Absolutely.
know during I know during shows and watering, I can get drippage on the stands, and if it happens, it happens, but, you know, whatever we can do to minimize the water is always ideal. Um, and then a simple furniture paste wax, if it gets scratched, eventually it can be refinished and the luster can come back. But a furniture paste wax can go a long ways to kind of blending scratches and reducing, the wear and tear of time and use, and make those just a little less obvious. So before you have to get to that point of a complete refinish.
Great, great. Yeah, I always try and put felt pads on the bottom of my bonsai pots. If I put them onto bonsai tables, I think that definitely helps. But
That's a
even
hot tip.
then, yeah, you
Yeah,
still can scratch them
because
up. But yeah, it does help.
they're it's heavy, they get adjusted, and you can be careful, and I say this a million times, but the photographer, maybe less so. You're
That's
not always
true.
gonna be present, and the bottom of pots, that's ceramic, it's sandpaper, and that I would say 99% of damage to stands is the bottom of the pot from 1 degree of a shift. I mean, that is the number 1 stand damage point right there. So anything you can do to mitigate that is gonna really help you. Um, and yeah, I felt it does, pop the pot up a little bit, but a lot of the times the weight of it will compress that felt enough where it's not terribly noticeable. Using dark felt pads, cut strategically inset, as much as possible, could just turn it into a shadow line, um, and it'll be completely unnoticeable. But that can really help out because it's a lot of times in photography, that final adjustment at the end once it's placed and "Oh, I wish it was just a little shift." That's when it gets you and when
Mm.
it goes to photography. Those are the 2 points I would say that
Yeah,
most of the damage hits.
gotcha, gotcha. Austin, do you mind if we take a 2-minute restroom break really quick?
Yeah, go for it. I'll get some more water.
Okay, I'll be super quick. All right.
Alright. Yeah.
Cool. So, I wanted to ask you a bit, if it's okay with you, about finishes and jointery, if that's okay. But I want to
Yeah.
make sure that I am not making you divulge any proprietary information
I don't have
about
any
either of those
proprietary
subjects.
information. People have been woodworking since before the Egyptians. It's all been done. Um, to me, it's a signature, like you can't forge a signature. I can copy it, but it's not gonna be the same thing. So I have no secrets. Shoot.
That makes sense. I think Peter T can wire up a tree, and I can watch exactly, every little
Yeah,
movement that he makes, but I can't do it exactly like him. So I get
exactly.
it.
It's
Yeah,
just yeah, wire is not his secret. It's just how he uses it, you know.
absolutely. Makes sense. Cool. Well, I guess with that said, can you talk to me about finishes? I feel like I love your finishes. I appreciate them so much. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not great. I don't have an extensive woodworking background. I don't know a ton about finishing wood pieces or anything like that. However, I feel like they just look very natural in terms of you can really still appreciate the beauty of the wood itself when I look at your finishes. Like they're not like too in your face or flashy. They just look
Mhm.
very, very nice. They go well, they complement the bonsai trees, and they really just enhance the wood. I don't know how to describe it other than that, but I'm a massive fan of the way that you
Sounds
finish
great to
wood.
me. Uh, I mean, yeah, finishing's tough, I mean, and you can really screw a piece on the finishing side. You can be a woodworking, genius, but if the finish doesn't deliver, the piece doesn't. For me, and part of this is kind of niche specific because of the bonsai. I like to go oil on the finishes. You basically have kind of 2 directions you can go. You can go poly or you can go oil. The big difference on and then those is the poly is just basically a flat plastic film that sits on top of the wood, whereas an oil is kind of a blended layer. It's kind of in the top layer of the wood, and I do it to create a film. So in the end, there is a small film there, but it's kind of merged with the wood. Um, the advantage of the oil is in a poly situation, if you scratch it, to refinish it, if you were to spray over it again, that scratch is going to leave, they call it sight lines. You can see where that scratch was. It leaves kind of a shadow of itself. And so the only way to refinish a piece coated in a poly finish is to completely remove every bit of that plastic film before respraying it again, which is fine and easy on something flat and simple. But anything with complex nuance and dimension, it's a labor intensive pain in the butt with harsh chemicals. It's not an easy process. And, in the bonsai realm, where we are kind of staring down scratches, we're essentially daring you know, things to scratch our pieces here. I mean, pots are what you're putting on it. Pots do want to, I mean, it's just like, we were talking with the felt. That's 99% of the damage. And so I kind of want to set it up for an ease of repair so that when and if it does get scratched, it's not this total kind of system that you have to redo. So the oil finishes, each layer will kind of merge with the next. So you can spot refinish an oil, uh, and not have to redo the whole thing.
So
Um,
if you did get a scratch on top, would it be better to use the exact type of oil that you use compared
yeah,
to some like that would be ideal?
it's good to consider because a lot of times because they are merging, if you're mixing them, they can sometimes not cooperate with each other, which can lead to issues. Also, different finishes have different tints, and so if you get that wrong, that can alter the final look. I use 2 different kinds of oils, because I don't get what I want out of either one, and I
Ugh.
found that the 2 will work with each other just fine, and I can kinda get the best of both of their worlds by combining them. I used to use exclusively the first, Waterlocks is the name brand, and it's a fairly dark tinted, it's advertised as a resin impregnated tongue oil. Um, I guess to give a little back history, tongue oil and shellac are kind of your ancient finish categories. Simple to apply, act like an oil. They're very nice finishes. The only problem is they offer zero water protection. And so not really well suited in a bonsai world, not really well suited in your typical household. Most people want a little more protection out of their finish. In 1750, it's what they had. It worked just fine. It's beautiful. If you want to use coasters, it'll work today. But that's not a realistic expectation in the bonsai world. And so the water locks, they've impregnated resin into the tongue oil, so it builds up a layer of protection over the tongue oil, giving it that kind of little bit extra. Originally developed as a floor finish, it's been around since 1909. Real durable stuff. The only downside of it is it dries gloss, and there's no way around that. It'll mellow in time and kind of come down to a satin, but that's more 5, 10 year time. So, um, gloss finish, I'm not seeing a wide acceptance of that in the market, these days. People want a matte to satin, and they want it now and not in 10 years. So with the water locks, it just kinda got to this point where it really wasn't meeting expectations of what people were wanting, and there really isn't a good way of knocking it down, to a lower luster. But that dark pigmentation in the finish, um, really gives the wood a nice depth. It stains it a little bit, but not in like a wood stain kinda way. It just kind of basically takes the tones that are there and just punches them up that little bit extra. And I really like getting that little extra punch to it. So definitely, I still use that as my kind of undercoat to get that dark color and get that depth protection. And then I use Osmo on top of that, which is a hard wax oil, which is pretty new technology in terms of finishing. Um, Again, developed as a floor finish, so high durability on that one. And that can be done as a matte. So we're getting the matte tone out of the Osmo. Um, so laying that on top of the waterlocks, we're getting the color and then getting the matte from the Osmo. The Osmo itself isn't pigmented, clear as a bell, so it doesn't give quite the same luster to the wood that the waterlocks lend. So on its own, it doesn't the wood just doesn't feel as alive, which is why I still continue to start with the other one as well. So generally speaking, when I'm refinishing with just the Osmo. If the damage
Okay.
is extensive, I might go in with the water locks, but overlaying the water locks on top of the Osmo doesn't totally work. Osmo being kind of more wax based, it wants to resist moisture. So it acts as a heavy repellent for whatever goes on top, including additional finish. So generally speaking, once that Osmo layer is on, that's the only thing that's going to go on top of it from there. So that's my general formula.
That is so cool. So innovative of you to blend the two together. Have you been blending the two for a long time, or initially you said you were using the first one, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a spell I've been blending them, at least 7, 8, maybe a decade. I don't know exactly when I started putting the 2 together, um, but
Awesome.
it's been a good
Awesome.
while of putting the 2 together.
Okay.
Osmo's a little less finicky too, which is also nice for my end. It's just a little easier to apply. It does take longer to dry though, which is the only downside. It's like a week between coats, which really
Yeah.
slows down the process, which is another reason to get the stand orders in, to just beat that drum because there's just no way to fast track that process. I can't make the Osmo cure faster. It's a partially chemical reaction. And so by putting it in a warmer room, it's not going to change it. It's still going to be a slow creep to getting hard. Um,
And how many
so
coats do you generally apply?
generally 5.
Oh,
So
okay.
2 water locks and then 3 of the Osmo. 2 of the Osmo a little bit thicker, and then the final, what I would consider to be a buffer coat that goes on super dry. I mean, to the point where, taking the lid of the Osmo can, so just what's collected on the underside of the lid when you shake a can, and then just basically quickly tapping a rag in that. And that little bit, it, I would cover, couple square feet of
Yeah.
material with that. So a
Ah,
very skim coat. But it does kind of unify everything, just that little bit extra. Treating it more as a wax than anything else, like a furniture wax, where you apply it very minimally and it just kind of unifies everything in a very nice way. Um, so basically, 4 coats of substance and 1 coat of air, kind of like the Bob Ross, where it's, 2 bristles in air kind of situation, um,
awesome.
for that.
Can I make a request, Austin?
Sure.
uh, so one thing that I absolutely love that you do is I don't know if this is the correct term because I think ASMR is more of a audio thing. However, from a visual perspective, when you post the videos of you applying the first coat onto like some nice
Oh,
walnut or something like that, can you please just
yeah,
do that for every single first coat? Can you make a video and post it? Because
I
I
know,
love
it's
there's something
sexy.
about like seeing that. I love it.
It's the glass bottom boat, it's the magic. I mean, you kinda see what the wood's gonna do before that first coat, but the first coat, it really pops. I'll try. I do realize that is a moment,
Yeah,
The problem in this day and age where, media face is a big part of, what everybody does. It's remembering in the course of your workday to kind of document those moments. You get really wrapped up in getting things done and getting the next thing done and doing the next thing.
for
And then
sure.
it's like, oh shit, I forgot to put the camera on this one. Um, I'll definitely do more of that. I'll try and do more. It's always, I mean, it's hard to know with the social media presence what anybody, because you're just throwing it out into this void, and there's often not really much kind of feedback on what matters or if anybody's even listening at all. Um, so it's always good to hear kind of what people are into. Um, so no
Well,
problem with that.
for whatever reason, it's just so satisfying to see that first coat on, and so I never get
It's
sick of it. So please.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in the same boat. I see it all the time, and every time it still gets me. The really fun ones is when I'm doing Jitas and I've got 37 different kinds of wood that are getting that first coat at the same time. And I've done a couple of videos of those where it's just like, let's do it with cherry, let's do it with walnut, let's do it with manzanita. How about this one now? And it's just like you're getting that over and over and over again in different ways. And those are pretty fun. Um, but yeah, I'll do a better job. At least I'll try. I've been a little dormant, I guess would be the nice way of putting it on the social lately. You goes and it comes as far as your own relationship with it. Um,
That's how I'm
but
with it too. Yeah.
yeah, and then also in the lead up to the surgery and everything, it was hyper focused on just getting the shit done. And I had a checklist, and I really had to check it everything off of that. And so a lot of the periphery just got totally dropped. Um, and that I'm just, yeah, I'm not the best uh, media guy, um, you know, but yeah,
Sweet.
noted.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Cool. So, would you talk to me a little bit about joinery? I know that there are probably an infinite amount of different ways that you could approach combining different pieces of wood. Can you talk to me
Yeah.
a little bit about your philosophy there?
I mean, the main thing of joinery is when joining two pieces of wood, generally we're using glue. The Japanese, they didn't use glue and had heavily complex interlocking joints that allowed that. Um, Modern time and modern expenses don't allow for that kind of labor. So the
Now,
real key component go.
with
Yeah.
so sorry to interrupt your thought there, but with old Japanese bonsai tables or Chinese bonsai tables or the tables that we see in the kokufu, do you think that there is glue involved in those tables? I know a
Yeah,
lot of them
I would
are
assume
quite
so.
ancient, but okay,
Yeah, I would assume so. I think most of the glue list was temple joinery.
makes
Um,
sense.
and I'm not 100% on my facts here. I think part of it might have been earthquake resistance, giving it that kind of flexibility. Um, I don't think it was an access issue. I don't think it was like the Japanese didn't have glue and so they didn't use it. I might be wrong, but I don't think that was the reason behind that process. Um, but my guess would be, especially when you get it down to that scale, it's the interlocking thing doesn't work on that fine of a scale. There's just not the room to do that without glue, anymore. When you have giant beams, you can use pegs and stuff to do that. But when you start to get that size down, it doesn't really translate in the same way.
That makes sense.
So I would say in that case, those are all glued. Um, and then the glue presents this functional dilemma is, if you imagine wood as a bundle of straws, um, when I put glue on the side of those straws, it sits there and can join with another bundle of side straws. But when I put glue on the end of those straws, it sucks up all the straws. which starves that connection of glue because all that glue is getting pulled into the grain, basically. And so when I'm joining end grain to long grain or end grain to end grain, glue's not going to work. Glue's not going to make a secure joint with that. Um, and so you need some way of getting long grain next to long grain. That is basically that's the mathematical problem in all wood joinery
Mm.
is how do I get long grain to touch long grain in these two joints? And so a lot of times that's simply putting a spline between the two. So if I have a spline that goes into this piece, is buried into it, the long grain of the spline touches the long grain inside, and then it's conversely buried into the other piece, and the long grain of the spline touches the long grain of that one, which gives me a secure glue joint. A miter joint, which we see a lot in bonsai stands, is better than an end grain situation, but we're still not getting that kinda long grain secure, so I can't do a miter on its own right. I need to have something in there, to secure that as well.
Super
Again,
new,
floating
new. So sorry, super
you
newbie question. What is a miter joint? I've heard that term before. I don't exactly know what it is. I think it's just like a very basic
Miter
joint.
is 45-degree angle, so
Okay.
when we're joining 45 to 45, that's a
Ah,
miter, so
okay.
this is a butt, when you're flat to a long. Miter is when we're, at a 45, which gives us those smooth transitions. Also kind of when you think of the straw side of wood, when I apply finish to a wood, the side of that straw is not going to absorb as much finish, whereas the end of that straw is going to suck up a lot of finish. And the more finish that sucks up, the darker the wood's going to turn. So typically, end grain is going to turn a lot darker than long grain. So in a lot of Japanese and Chinese furniture, and in essence bonsai as well, the miter is utilized so you eliminate all end grain, so you don't have this kind of visual disruption of these dark patches scattered throughout the piece. You get this harmonious tone where the wood's the same color on all sides. Um, so you don't have that kind of visual disruption. So I tend to favor that kind of aesthetic. Some like the arts and crafts movement in America and Europe wasn't as afraid of end grain and kind of used that. But in my aesthetic, I kind of prefer this kind of even tone that we get from long grain. So the miter joint is, yeah, that kind of 45-degree a joint. And a lot of times in bonsai stands where we have legs joining two rails, you have the top of the stand where you have a 90-degree, and then we have another 90-degree, kind of an XYZ axis. Um, that's basically a three-way miter situation where you have instead of a 45-degree cut along the way, you have two 45-degree cuts so that you can join three diverging axes without any end grain being exposed, which complicates the miter just that little bit extra, and, requires a different type of kind of joinery engineering to get that to happen. So in my work, by and large, I'm using splines to kind of bridge that gap, mostly for its efficiency. I've looked at strength tests, and it's a floating spline is what they call it, and that's where you insert a piece of wood in rather than carving a piece of wood to extend past and insert into the other piece. You don't really gain any structure there. It's a little bit more just a flex of technique. Um, but it's also very labor intensive, and so can really just kind of create budgetary conflicts in a lot of cases in terms of what the labor takes to do things. So putting a floating spline in there, you're kind of getting there, just a little bit easier. And it does allow you a little more flexibility in terms of what I can attempt, in terms of creating the pieces because they don't have to have that connection. I can take bigger risks. I can use the material a little more fluidly rather than having to incorporate the joint into the actual piece. Um, and then outside of that principle, you can, like you said, there's a million and one ways you can cut to join these things. I mean, anybody who's ever flip through the pages of a Japanese joinery book, I mean, it's a rainbow of techniques, all doing different things and in different ways. And sometimes, you have to kind of use these different techniques to get it to work. For example, on that Frank Lloyd Wright piece, that side stand, um, it was kind of it's going to be hard to explain without any visual aids. Um, but so the stand, is pretty typical three-way miter stand, four legs, square top. Um, but I wanted to create that slatting effect. So it goes up, and then there's three rails to kind of form that visual kind of slats that you see on the island. Um, but the way the grain flows with the end grain and everything is very specific, and so I wanted, that first slat, I wanted it to miter. So you come up from the legs and it miters, goes into the horizontal piece, then miters back and falls down into the next leg. And then there's a recess, and then you have your second slat. But that one's not gonna miter because there's nothing for it to miter into. So that one's just horizontal with the miter on the side to kind of keep the horizontal trajectory clean all the way around the stand. And then the top slat, um, has the visual miter both on the sides, but then also the top. When you view it from above, you need the miter so that one flows. So that one had to kind of be mitered in a different way. So you get that fluidity kind of on the top grain. And each of those kind of required me to cut away both the leg piece and the horizontal piece in different ways so that that kind of grain integrity is maintained. And I'm still getting that connection with the long grain to produce a secure joint. Um, and that was kind of the push and pull and the challenge of that, which is a fun challenge to solve. Um, but, can get complicated at times. Um, the one advantage of the Shohin is it's such a small scale. Those joints structurally, there's not much being asked of them. So there's a little more freedom there in what I can do without having to reinforce them. To do that for a 277-pound tree would be a very different scene.
Yeah.
And there has been times when I've replaced these floating spines with steel to reinforce the joint because
Mm,
the wood isn't gonna do it
yeah.
past that, and so I've had to have special, you know, steel pieces welded up that I can bury in the piece to
Mm.
support the weight. Um,
Is there a
and then hide
certain
those in wood.
is there a certain weight limit that you start thinking about steel?
Eh, that more comes into the cantilever, side of things is where I kinda go into that more. It would have to be a pretty heavy weight limit with 4 pieces. I mean, I'm sure there'd be a case where maybe I would need that on a regular kind of four-legged situation, but counteracting the flex situation on a
Totally.
cantilever, because
Yeah.
even 2 degrees of flex is really gonna mess up a display. Um, and wood's always gonna kinda have that flexibility to it. Um, so cantilevers, 50 pounds, nothing to sweat there. But when we start cresting 100 pounds in a cantilever, that's starting to get to a point where steel might just have to be involved to just solidify that angle and make sure that there is zero movement in that wood.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Do you ever bounce ideas off of or even chat with other stand makers, bonsai stand makers? Or do you reach out to a lot of different people or like are you involved in any groups, woodworking groups or anything like that?
I mean, I've got woodworking buddies. Unfortunately, it's a thin crowd in the stand maker world, so I don't really get to chat much. I enjoy at the shows getting to chat with stand makers, and we can certainly talk shop at those points, but that's when I tend to get the most exposure, to them. I can't think of another stand maker in Portland off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Um, so, without that kind of face-to-face interaction, I don't get a lot of, a chat time.
Totally.
Occasionally if I'm trying something that I am like, yeah, I'm trying to solve a problem, and I've got my theory and I'm a little dubious if it's actually gonna be appropriate. I'll hit up a woodworker friend of mine and be like, "Hey man, like, you wanna tell me what I wanna hear here? Is this sound good to you? Is this gonna work?" And they'll be like, "Mm, I don't like that idea," and they made me
Yeah.
rethink my thought process. I have a buddy in town who, he always jokes that, he contacts me because I never tell him what he wants to hear because he'll come up with these ideas. I'll be like, "That's not gonna fucking work, man."
Oh.
He's like, "Why don't you just tell me what I wanna hear?" And I'm like, "Well, I can tell you what I wanna hear, but it's when it's on the floor, you're not gonna wanna see that." So, sometimes it's nice to just kinda get that reality check
Yeah,
that, maybe the easy route ain't gonna be the one you're going on this round. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's definitely nice to have people in the wood world, be it from, lumber suppliers, it's good to chat with them, and I've got a couple friends around who, just they mill wood exclusively, and they certainly have, skill and knowledge set that they can offer, on through actual, finished furniture makers, and it's never a bad idea to know guys making cabinets too, because I mean, there's wisdom in that, and sometimes the structural demands of cabinet making can lend themselves to come in handy. Sometimes you gotta merge these kind of fields to kind of create these things when people want. I mean, the idea that the custom world, you're reinventing the wheel every time. I mean, this is not something that is you're making something original, so it's not like there's this really roadmap to follow in a lot of cases. So
yeah,
sometimes it requires you to get outside the box and kind of pull from different fields to create something that works.
for sure, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. There's not a whole lot of US bonsai stand makers in the United States. It's
I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, nobody's gonna complain too much about being a monopoly, but at the same time, I think it does limit maybe a little bit how the stand is appreciated, and I think it also kinda does reflect a bit too how the stand is appreciated in the art of bonsai. In Japan, the stand isn't really given a lot of prestige, and the display is not really considered to be a, necessarily integral part of the display. Does it fit? Does it work? Does it match? Yes, but it struggles to get above picture frame level, in an art museum. Nobody's going to consider the picture frame of a Picasso as really integral to the Picasso. They can distract from the Picasso, but it's not really thought of in the same tier. A big part of what I've tried to explore is making the stand a part of that tree story, kind of coming above the picture frame to where it actually has a voice in the display. Because there's so limited parts of a bonsai display. You kind of want to get the most mileage out of every part, in my esteem. And every part, does have a lot to say about what's happening in the display and what's happening with that tree. So, for me, the Japanese kind of view is a little bit of a lost opportunity to not really integrate those stands into the image that we're trying to create.
very nice. uh yeah, that's interesting. And if you don't have the right stand, it surely can be very distracting or just throw your whole composition
Okay.
off.
Yeah. I mean, it could be a real flat tire,
Yeah,
and little things, thickness, a lot of times the visual mass of the stand could just really sink a
yeah.
display in both ways. It can be too thin, it can be too thick. That's a big one there that I think gets people 9 out of 10 times is just having, and it tends to be too thick over too thin. Um, Sometimes that's just through not trusting the media, just thinking that you need more wood than you do. Um, and sometimes it's just not picking the right piece to go with it or, maybe just being, I've got this option and so I'm using it. And,
Yeah,
certainly that does happen and that, can't be avoided in many cases. But I think simply just, you know, pushing the delicacy of the stand, boom, that can take the display to a new level. That and the
100%.
color. I think
Yeah.
mismatched color is another big thing I see at a lot of shows. Just a stand that's way too light for the tree that's on it. And it's
Huh.
just, y you know, that's a big distraction, you know? Deciduous, you get a little more freedom with that, but, you know, in a conifer Yamadori heavy America, a lot of times it's that light yellow wood, with this big pine on it. And it's just kinda like, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't think it works, unless you're trying to evoke the pollen.
Yeah. Yeah. The point that you were making just a second ago about maybe the stand being like an afterthought compared to the tree, that's an interesting one. And I think about it, and I think I'm going to do a horrible job at trying to articulate what my thought is there. But I do think that maybe I don't necessarily see it as beneath the bonsai tree, or well, it's literally beneath. I mean,
Yeah, I was
like,
gonna say
you know,
literally, yes.
not beneath, like not as important as the bonsai tree. I just think that it's almost like, I don't know. Uh a long time ago I would sing in choir, and they would actually say that, like, if you can hear somebody in a choir, specifically, like you can single out one person's voice, it can be distracting, and that's not actually what you want. You want like a harmonious tone coming from multiple individuals singing. And I feel like there's a lot of beauty with the bonsai stand when it's extremely well crafted. And I just think that it doesn't have to be overly loud.
Yes.
It has
I
to flow with the overall composition. And
yes.
I don't know what I'm saying exactly, other than
No, I
I
think
think that
that's
there's yeah, go ahead.
oh, I think that's well articulated, and I agree, that's entirely true. You don't wanna look at a bonsai display and see the stand first and exclusively. I guess for me, it's a matter of story integration. Um, like the kusamono is an element that incorporates into the story of the bonsai. The pot, in a lot of cases too, is an element that incorporates into the story of the bonsai. The slab pot, the brightly colored glazed pot. We're really pulling it into the story of the tree where it is, what it does, what it can be. I don't think the stand is always considered in that level of story integration. I think a lot of times the stand is seen as a functional display. And it's not that it's like not presented, it's that it's more functional than it's incorporated in that sense, if that,
Yeah,
makes any sense there. And I think that's the what delineates it for me
got
is
it.
really pushing that stand to be a part of the story, not standing out on its own, not, being boom, here we are, but just kind of being like, hey, I'm going to tell you about this tree too,
Yeah,
and it's done in minutia. I mean, just the fact, like, when we consider a cascade stand, the height of the cascade stand is telling us about this tree. It's growing up on a mountain, you know? It's it's thin and it's kind of precipitous. It's tippy. It's a thin, tall table. It's not well balanced. This tree is high. It's on a ledge. It's, tipping to it's not secure. It's not grounded, whereas, a big, broad deciduous on a big, broad stand, it's in a stable valley. The dirt spreads out flat for miles around it. It's at no risk, I mean, just that kind of level of nuance just really kind of does tell the story, of the tree and what it's doing and where it's living and what it has to tell us. And you can take it further from there, and you could be more literal or less. Um, One thing I like about bonsai is it tends to be less literal. I'm not a big fan of the kind of like, this is my meaning art, do you get it? To
Yeah.
me, it kind of feels just, I don't need to be told. I get told enough every day. You scroll through things, people tell you their opinion. That's fine. It's nice to be able to sit with something and just see, how do I feel? Do I enjoy it? There's nothing to get. There isn't an answer to this problem.
Yeah.
It's just enjoy, and how do you enjoy
100%.
it? And how do you feel? So, yeah, that's always been the magic of bonsai to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's definitely a balance there. People can get way too crazy with, like, telling you the story behind everything, like, "Ah, the lightning struck this tree and blah, blah, blah." Like, you could go on and on and on. At the same time, if you don't have any story, I don't think that's good either.
Yeah. And
I like
it's
that a
like
lot. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's
less.
that balance. It's like you
Uh-huh.
don't wanna hear anybody in the choir, but if the guy's not even singing,
That's not
why
good
is he
either.
in the choir either, Like,
That's a
you need the voices to make the choir, so everybody's gotta be heard, but then nobody's gotta be heard. So it's this real delicate balance where you
yeah,
kinda have to be there without being there in a way, Like, I did a redwood stand once, and there was some natural burning on the wood. And so I actually burnt kind of the underside of the top of the stand, one for color to kind of give it, just some color variation to break up the form. But two, to kind of just tell the story of this redwood. Like, yeah, fire is a part of this tree's life. So I made it part of the stands, design wise. But it's kind of hinting at this just bigger picture, you know, a
yeah,
simple thing like that, but it can really elevate, what we're saying and what we're feeling and what we understand about the tree above it.
I like
And
that.
then maybe that leads you to a bigger issue like, well, fire is good and natural, but excess is a problem. And then we can talk about all other kinds of shit after that, but you know, we don't need to have that slammed in our face. You know, it's
For
not
sure.
nobody's changing their mind at this point. I think we've learned that over the years. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I am very excited about my Pacific Bonsai entry. I hope that it gets accepted to the show, and I feel like there's like I'm so excited that you made the stand for me, and I think that it's really cool that we integrated the manzanita into the stand because Sierra junipers, which is the tree that I'm showing, it grows near manzanita. I think the colors are going to look really nice. I think it's great that you are an American bonsai stand maker. I felt like that felt right to me, even if I can't like explain why that should be right or feels right. I like that that we used walnut, which is not a native tree to California, but it I believe was
it's an
sourced
I
from California.
it's an I that walnut actually was in California.
Ah,
It was actually Washington walnut. But walnut is an iconic species, I would say, from California. I would say it's an economic mainstay of the state for sure.
totally.
That was actually a grafted English black walnut, which would be what you would be getting from California. So it's the same dynamic there for sure. Um, but yeah, no, yeah, I mean, going back to the story thing, it's great to have those little touches that really speak to their overall, image of the tree. And I enjoy making the stands for these trees. I enjoy seeing them together. I mean, to me, I get the biggest thrill out of producing the stand and then seeing the two merged and having, both the stand and the tree elevated through that. The stand looks good on its own, but it's never gonna look as good as it is when the tree's on it. And hopefully, if I do my job right, I could say the same for the tree. Um, I hope to say I bring something to the table, with that. Um, I think that's for other people to say though, not myself. Um,
You
but
absolutely
yeah,
do.
it's that's my favorite part of it is I can't tell people enough, like, getting that first client photo of the stand and the tree together when it's delivered and on display. As much as the first coat of finish never gets old for you, that photo never gets old for me. I love seeing those. And that's, yeah, my number one enjoyment of all of this. So for sure.
That's
So
awesome.
I'm looking forward to the PB. They always do one hell of a good job with that show. Um, and so I'm certainly excited about that. I'm excited about the plethora of bonsai exhibits we're going to have next year. I can't believe how many. It's so great, especially after COVID when it was just so lean for so long on the display and the show side of things to see this many exhibitions of prominence too. I mean, everybody the club shows are fine and they're great fun, but these national events, where you get just the top caliber of everything, are just great to see, and to see 3 in a year as opposed to 1 every other year is just awesome. So, I'm
Totally.
certainly, hoping and happy to be at all of them, and, looking forward to seeing everybody too and all the trees.
That's great.
Maybe talk to a few stand makers while I'm there.
That would be awesome. Um, Changing gears here a little bit, I was wondering how the root stand process has been going for you. I feel like that's kind of a different thing, new avenue for you to go down.
It is
How's it
new.
been working out?
It's been working out surprisingly well. I'm working on my 2nd, root stand, commission piece. The first one I cut from a pre-existing kind of natural block of wood, and I really thought that would facilitate the root stand process a lot better, just having that kinda natural form. Um, Turns out that's not the case. This one was cut from a solid block that I trimmed down on my own to the form of my choosing, and it went much faster and it went much smoother than the first.
Interesting.
So a little lesson learned there. Yeah, I did not expect that result, and I was very surprised when it kinda went that way. So that was very interesting. Um, they're a bit of work, but they're a lot of fun to make. I'm hoping to do a few just kinda spec root stands to have on offer, either at the shows or preceding the shows if they get done in time. Um, but I do plan on this being a more regular thing. It's definitely something to explore, and just the fluidity and freedom of them are it's just really kind of enjoyable to do. Just sitting there, just hogging out material, left, right,
Yeah.
and center. Um, but then being freed from the natural form, really gave me a lot of room to kind of make it more dynamic and kind of create, a lot more interesting lines and flow through the stand because I could conceptualize that a lot more. Whereas, when you're pulling from the natural form, you're kind of constrained, you're kind of chained to that. And so you're a little more, I think, limited in the dynamism you could give to it. So definitely looking to push that, looking to push the balance and the delicacy of them. I've got a bonsai stand inspiration file on my computer that I've kept over the years. And, as I go through and see things, I'll stuff them in the folder for visual reference later. A lot of kokofu in there. But there's several root stands that I've compiled in that folder over the years that, to me were just kind of, and I think they're exclusively all Japanese. I don't know if I how many root stands have been made outside of Japan that you don't see that form created a lot. Um, Even in modern Japanese display, I don't know if there are many being made contemporarily. I think a lot of them are just kind of older, remnants of past constructions. Um, but I've been pulling inspiration from those, some really good movement. That was just what really drew me to them. Very dynamic, and movement and dynamism is always kind of where I lean to aesthetically. Um, Happy to be strong and static, but if I could be unbalanced and dynamic, that's the way I'm going to go. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I got a huge block of acacia wood out of California, a buddy of mine picked up, and there's at least 2 root stands in that block. So that that'll be, one of those things I get back to once this Frank Lloyd Wright job gets wrapped up. I'll start production on a few of those, hopefully, if I can get the time.
Ah, very exciting. Yeah, I think from the first one that I saw that you did, I was blown away. I thought it looked really, really nice, and so I'm very excited to see you continue to make those. And yeah, I think I heard a narrative, and I don't know how true this is, but I've heard that in Japan they're not being produced very commonly, and so a lot of people are just hoarding them away or buying up whatever they can find.
That's
Um,
kind of the narrative I heard.
yeah, I don't know how much truth there is, but that's what I've heard from a couple different people.
I mean, they're not exactly labor unintensive, so it makes a lot of sense.
Are you using like a
Okay.
Dremel type tool?
I'm using everything. Um, starting off starting off, I have a 3/4 inch drill bit that's 18 inches long. So starting off with that and just using a hammer drill, which is just kind of very
Yeah,
high powered drill, and just kind of almost blindly wailing through it. They're kind of this mix of intentional form and finding form, so it's kind of removing a lot of material. And then once you start to get that whittled down, then you can got to be like, well, what lines do I want to prioritize here? But when it's a solid block, it's like there's only too many options. So I feel like you kind of got to remove material to kind of give yourself a path. Um, so just hogging out material, just rocking the drill, using it almost as a cutting tool as much as a drilling tool to open up holes. And then, I have a big old metal bit with burrs cut on it that was actually I got it, when I first moved to Portland. I worked at a factory that made, engines, for the Boeing 787, so big titanium jet engines, and they would use these burrs to grind down the titanium, and so I took a couple of them. They would throw them out, when they were too dull for titanium, but they were still really good for wood, so I took a couple of those, to cut, and I've just been using that to just it just devastates, just tear up the wood, make the hole bigger, using a handsaw to cut away chunks, to open up more air, and then, at that point, kinda getting in there with a Dremel for the fine tuning detail and making sure things flow interestingly and are the right delicacy, but yeah, just kinda, you know like any painting, you start with broad strokes and then you just kind of refine it as you go,
that's
has
so
been my
cool.
general approach.
Yeah,
So, and then the finish levels where it kind of gets bogged down, getting a uniform sanding texture on those kind of
mm,
lines is very challenging. And I've yet to find
bet.
an efficient way to do that. The first one I ended up burning, which kind of smooths the texture, and then wire brushing it to kind of achieve a more kind of natural root bark kind of texture, which I think I'm a little more towards that side of things. Just because if it is a root stand, I don't know if you've ever seen a root before, but they're not smooth. They're textured like any tree bark. So having that kind of natural texture to me feels more appropriate. I know in Japan they're traditionally quite finished. And I think this one's probably going to fall more towards that model. So that's been kind of a tedious thing getting it to that point. Um, but I do think there is potential to kind of play with the texture on these things and to kind of approach it in a more natural. Um, and then, on the spec side of things, there's more freedom to play. And I think I do want to push the balance and kind of have them as this kind of cross of natural root with maybe some sort of man-made prop element to it. I don't know, kind of see where it goes. But certainly interested in maybe pushing that element where they feel like they either can't stand on their own or they're being supported, kind of like, old trees when they prop up the branches, kind of inspired by that dynamic. I think there may be something interesting to explore there.
Yeah. So cool. Very cool. I'm excited to see you continue to develop those. Um, there is one individual that makes some really cool ones. Do you know Sean Smith? I believe his name is stand
Yeah, that name
maker on
sounds familiar.
the East Coast.
The name sounds super familiar. I can't picture a stand in my head from it.
Yeah,
Um,
and I'm not sure how many stands he's making these days, but I think he studied in Japan, I believe. But anyways, I've seen some really nice root stands from him. But I think it's been a
Interesting.
while since I've seen them. I don't know if he's making them these days or not. But another like the only other person that I know of that makes root stands in the United States.
Is it him?
Yeah, Sean Smith.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd be curious to check those out.
yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
they don't get a lot of, I mean, like I said, again, it's high labor, which
Yes,
is gonna translate into more expense, which
absolutely.
does limits the market, you know? And then in bonsai display, they're kind of a specific niche as well, Like, not every tree is a root stand tree, you know?
Totally.
It's a very specific tree that gets displayed on those. Uh, so it's kind of like double impeded there almost in that regard. But they're beautiful, and so I think they are worth making.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, Austin, I posted on my Instagram story. I know you reshared the post, but I just asked if anyone had questions for you. Is that cool if we dive
Yeah.
into some of those?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I thought there were some good ones and some funny and interesting ones. One of the
Yes. Oh,
first ones was, would you take an apprentice?
yeah, I know, I get that occasionally. Um, I'm not opposed to the idea, but it's never presented in a way that worked for both parties. I've had people reach out, and it's been they were asking kinda too much, like, just on a business side to make it work, wanting health insurance and everything. I'm like, "Yeah, well, sometimes I feel lucky to get it for myself, and I don't know if there's the room for that." Um, and I took a pseudo apprentice earlier on, and there was some technical hiccups, that, ended up being problematic just in competency, just not knowing woodworking and interacting with high stakes pieces, and led to some problems that, were with one of a kind wood that was not easy to
Yikes.
resolve. Yeah.
Oof. Yeah.
So it's definitely a needle to be threaded, you know? But if ever the right situation were to come around, I'm not opposed to the idea. Um, and all these bonsai guys are lucky; they get tons of apprentices. Uh, but yeah, nobody's beating down my door either to do that. Um, so maybe one day we'll see if the right situation were to arise.
Yeah, I feel like with apprenticeship, both with bonsai and potentially if you were ever to take somebody on, it's all about finding the right person, and it just has to
Yeah,
fit for both parties. It has to be someone that you vibe well with and is going to be very cautious with, high end wood and clients orders and things like that. And it's also
yeah, it's a real
there's safety
relationship.
violations and yeah, so or
Yeah,
safety concerns in the wood shop, and yeah, you got to find the right person.
yeah, there's a lot to it. So it's not a simple thing.
That makes
But
total sense. Yeah. Next question is, a couple of questions. One is, would you offer private lessons? And then the other is, would you ever teach a more advanced class or classes?
I do offer private lessons. I've done those in the past. I may not explicitly post that anywhere. I might, I don't know. It might be on I have a classes page on my website. I'm not sure if I mentioned private instruction on there, but I have done so, and I'm totally open to it. It's quite nice. I mean, the class environment, you're managing people towards a goal. It's always easier to manage one person to a goal than 10. So private instruction is great, um, and nothing against that at all. So if anybody's ever interested, please reach out. Again, it's fitting schedules and locations, but if those can be negotiated. I've even traveled to other people's shops to do private instruction in their space. And, it's just a matter of compensating for the travel time, and stuff. But yeah, totally open to that.
Sweet.
In terms of advanced classes, I've been trying to do a three-way miter stand class for a while now and haven't managed to get enough people together at one time to make it a viable class to run. So I would hope to, I'd want to. If there's an interest there, again, reach out. A lot of these classes are so time reliant. It's like I can post today, sign up for a class May 23rd, but if there isn't enough people on May 23rd that want to take the class, it doesn't run and it doesn't work. And so a lot of times the classes kind of, for me at least, because it's not my main hustle, kind of come about organically where, two people want a class and then it's like, oh, we got two people, what days are good for you? Let's see if we can get another and maybe we can make this thing run. I'm at the end of May, I'm teaching a class to a family, a husband, wife, mother, and I think a brother who all want to take a class together. So it was finding a day that worked for them and me, and we were able to schedule something that, was appropriate. So it never hurts to just drop a line, you know, one person in a class usually isn't enough to make it happen. Usually I try and hit 3 as kind of the magic number in the wood shop. Um, so if you have 3 friends that wanna take a class together, that's sweet, that's a lock as long as there's not a huge scheduling conflict for me, that's an easy one to make happen. If, you're interested in a class by yourself, you're just one, but you wanna take a class on something, speak up and, somebody else might have spoke up too, and I might be able to put something together and make it work. Or I can put out an email, and say, "Hey, anybody wanna do this?" So, you know, always interested and always happy. It's just,
Sweet.
making all the bells ring at once.
That makes sense. I feel like I just thought of an idea. I feel like Bonsai Club should hit you up and do like a Jita workshop where maybe
Yeah.
they get, small group together, you guys make your own Jita. I think that I would love to do that.
Done JITA classes in the past. They tend to focus predominantly on kind of the live edge aspect of things, cleaning up the JITAs. The technique I use to cut them it's not dangerous, but it's a little advanced. A lot of saw blade exposed. It's like 13 inches of saw blade exposed. I show it in the class, but it's not totally something I feel comfortable throwing at people to do, especially in any kind of beginner situation. It
Maybe
really
you just
takes
pre-cut a bunch and
yeah, and that's
different,
what I tend to do for the classes. I pre-cut them. We finish the live edge, we sand them, I go over the cutting process because it's fun to see, and everybody gets to go home with some Jitas, and that's a lot of
that's
fun.
cool. Yeah,
And it's an easy one day or 2, generally speaking. So yeah, I've done those in the past, a lot of fun. Um, my class scheduling tends to kind of flow with my work scheduling, so, like I said, it's kind of something I do a little more on the periphery, so when I get busy, classes tend to fall by the wayside. But
for
gentle
sure.
prods do kinda bring me back and be like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, hey, maybe we can put this in the schedule."
Nice, nice. Okay. This question is, if a customer gives a tree's dimensions, so the width of the tree, the height, the pot dimensions, etc., how do you determine the size of the platform and height of the legs for the tree's display?
General math on it is you want the periphery of the stand just inside of the furthest extent of the canopy. Differs a little bit when you get species specific. Deciduous, we're going to want a more broad spreading platform, still within the confines of the canopy. Conifer, they tend to have tighter canopies, so that tends to be a tighter stand. Also, you're just going to want a little less, a little tighter platform for a conifer. The pot falls with inside. There's the outer frame and then the interior kind of slab that, the picture window, so to speak, that kind of holds the pot. And the pot needs to fall within that. You don't want the pot to cross over that kind of perimeter line in the interior of the stand. Um, and so that kind of outside rail dimension kind of equalizes the two. So for a deciduous, it's very common to have like a 3-inch rail surrounding that inner platform to give the stand the width to span out to the near the edge of the canopy. Conifers are going to have a lot tighter rail around that center platform because they have the tighter canopy by and large. So it's just kind of balancing those two dimensions to get it to where it fits right. A cheater you see sometimes in the cocoa faux when a stand's not completely perfectly suited, you can push the pot back. So if the pot's too deep to fit with inside that picture window, it's acceptable to push it back over the back frame because it's a two-dimensional art. You don't really see that, just to ensure that that pot is within the picture window frame in the center. Every now and again in a show, I'll see a pot that breaches that, and it's just such a simple thing to push it back a little bit and open up that front rail. But definitely, yeah, that's better than the alternative of having it overhang. Um, and then the height is kind of a flavor of the month. I mean, generally speaking, the stand is to bring the tree up from the standardized tabletop to a proper viewing height. So, a taller tree is going to need a lower stand. A shorter tree is going to need a higher stand, but then we're also balancing the element of is it a cascade or is it, kind of spreading, more upright, formal type tree. So if we have a small formal deciduous, you don't want to put that on a tall stand, because it's not on a mountaintop, so we do have to balance that height there. So sometimes we have to pull back a little bit on the height to accommodate the kind of story and aesthetic of the tree. But generally speaking, it's, bringing it up to that level. And then proper viewing height is kind of a nebulous term. Proper viewing height for who? For me, I'm 6'2". For some guy who's 5'2", we're going to have a different proper viewing height. So there is a little bit of wiggle room in that. I tend to like them high. I like my trees up a little bit
Me
to
too.
to see them, to really appreciate them, get in the middle of them well. Um, but I think to me that's a taste issue, and some people like it different ways. Um, so there is a little bit of flexibility in that. But generally speaking, that's kind of how you balance the math of all those factors to kind of put the tree on the right sized stand where you want it to be.
Seems like with height, the backdrop is very important too, right? So you don't want to be above the
Yeah, it
backdrop.
plays. It plays. We've been working on a stand for the Pacific for a super high tree, and really tall tree. And different shows, different backdrops. I know, Bill with the National likes to put that front piece over, so you
Hmm.
have the backdrop and there's that front rail, which I know is a very Japanese traditional thing. Um, but I feel then there's more at stake if you go higher than the backdrop and
That's
there's
bad.
nothing in front,
Yeah,
it's not as bad as if you go up into this like front stopper, because then we're cutting off the tree at this point, and that's an issue. So yeah, it kind of depends on the venue as far as that goes. Um, but then it's like you're basically, you're trying to pick the lesser of two evils. Like, is it worse to have the tree too low so it can't be appreciated because the gin might go above the backdrop, or is it better for the gin to go above the backdrop and be able to appreciate the tree. And it kind of comes down to preference at that point, because I don't know if there is a right answer in that kind of situation. We face the same problems when we're developing a tree with branching. It's like, well, what's the best of the options that I have available? Because the ideal situation is not going to present itself here. So how do I mitigate the issues? What's the most important part of this tree? If that gin up there is the most important part of the tree, well, maybe it needs to come down. But if it's, down low where the interest is, maybe we sacrifice the gin and push it above the backdrop. And so it's trying to kind of determine, what are we going for?
Yeah.
What suits the tree best?
You know, and I completely agree with all of that. The part that I have a tough time figuring out, and that I left this part all up to you, is actually the thickness of the wood that we would use. So for me, it's fairly mathematical and logical to determine the height and the width of the table, but I don't want the tree to feel like it's gonna crush the stand, and I also don't want the stand to be too thick and look like it's overpowering for the tree, and so that
Yeah.
part is hardest for me personally.
Yeah, and thickness comes 2 ways too. There's the actual thickness of the wood, and then there's the perceived thickness. So when we put an edge treatment on a piece of wood, cut a cove out of it, change add elements to it, that breaks up that thickness. So visually, while it may be an inch thick piece of wood, if I cut a half-inch cove out of it, I'm seeing 2 half inches. Um, and so visually, I'm perceiving that differently than a inch thick piece of wood. Um, and so there too, we're balancing, for your case, weight of the tree was a big factor. So I left the thickness a little bit heavier than I would probably go on a lighter tree. But then using edge treatments to break that up and kind of visually diminish it as much as I could. Um, Also kind of the style of the stand, that piece, it's very slab based, so it's got wide expanses of wood. Visually, that's gonna make a heavier, bigger stand, so we don't need as much edge of wood to kinda compensate there. Whereas if it didn't have those wide expanses of wood, you might want a little more meat. Like a four-legged stand, those legs can get pretty thick to kind of balance that weight. Whereas where that leg is solid, you're gonna maybe need a little less thickness because it's made up for, across the width of the whole thing. Um, so I mean, in all art, there's no right answer. Um, and so it's all kind of balancing elements and kind of coming to what seems to be, the best solution of all factors.
Absolutely. Nice. Let's see. Alright, one question was, what piece of your work do you feel this might be really tough for this is a tough question.
I know what
I
you're gonna
wouldn't want
ask
this
too,
one.
you said it to me. This is the
Uh,
favorite childhood question.
yeah, yeah. What piece of your work do you feel best captures your artistic vision, and what inspired it? Whew, that's a tough one.
See, this is the one, and this comes back, you wanted me to rate my stance best to worst, and I guess my question to this question is, I don't think the mountain has one peak. That's where I find it difficult to answer. And so my question is best exemplifies in what means. Like, I mean, there's many aesthetic elements that I'm interested in exploring, color dynamics, shape, form, technical, you know, interests. So it's kind of like, and how do you put one of those above the other? I don't think they can be ranked in terms. So you have, these different peaks and, in terms, and so I could maybe answer it as a collective more like, in terms of color dynamics. I did a stand for Matt Berenberg out of Holly and rosewood that had this like electric white and purple aesthetic to it. Um, and I think chromatically that stand really stood out to me. And it's just really dynamic and it really punched and really played with the colors of wood in a natural way that I always really enjoyed. But then there's like technical challenges that also are interests, or just kind of like shape interests. Like I've been very interested in the kind of the wood carving and carving pieces of wood to form shapes while incorporating the natural elements of the wood, kind of like your redwood stand. And there's a piece on Ryan's website now that I made that kind of has curved sides and a curved base with incursions all throughout. And I think technically within that form, that was a real accomplishment to make that happen and to make that piece work. So for me, that one has always kind of been something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Um, that one with the curved leg, with the cherry live edge on the inside, um, that could be a color contender too. That black against the kind of reddish cherry really punched in a way that I think really made a statement. And then the shape of the live edge, I think also, I was very proud of how that was incorporated into the piece. That one has always been something I've been very proud of. Um, so yeah, it kind of depends on what what the what determines value, I guess. And I guess for me, it's kind of like there reaches a point where you get a plateau of value where one isn't necessarily above the other, it just achieves different things, different interests. In terms of experimentation, the concrete stand I did for the lab, um, I thought that one was I'm very proud of that piece. And I think that really, like, technically was a huge achievement for myself and really opened up some new avenues just in terms of what a bonsai stand can be and can do. Um, Chromatically, it wasn't very exciting. Um, you know, in terms of form, it wasn't the most dynamic, but still, something that I really treasure and I think was a very difficult and interesting piece to make, and I think worked really well. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's my highlight reel, I guess. The best as I think I can answer that question. Uh, but yeah, I do think it comes down to like, and even you talking about ranking your trees, like is a deciduous better than a conifer? Can a really good deciduous beat a really good conifer? Or, how do you rank those two? Because I feel like they're achieving different things, and they're striving for different points. And I guess you could get down to the nuance of branching and stuff to maybe separate out the two. But then again, at the same time, that conifer might really jump out at you and make a statement. The deciduous might really win in subtlety. It's hard to put one, like, where how do you parse that out?
Yeah.
So that's where I kinda get it's a multi-peaked mountain, it's a sawtooth
Yeah,
situation, and I think at a point, yeah, like,
100%. Yeah,
you climb to the top, and you can look over and see the top of the other one. Um, I don't know if one can necessarily climb above the other. That's where I get
yeah,
hung up there.
ranking things is very challenging with bonsai and with your stands. I couldn't do it, and I think it requires a tremendous amount of thought, and I think it really comes down to how exactly are we ranking these things, or what is the specific criteria you want them ranked on?
I
So,
think it
like,
has yeah, you have to give it that first before you can really delve into
yes,
it, and that's
for
arbitrary. And
100%.
depending on what your criteria is, that's gonna change that ranking, you
Yes.
know?
Is
Um,
it
so
trees for bonsai? In my mind, I was like, okay, am I ranking these trees as they stand today or their future potential? And am I ranking them for like how good they are in the United States or how good they
yeah,
are worldwide? Because, hey, my
yeah,
Korean hornbeam is really good in the United States, but if you take it to Japan, it's pretty good. So, what are
and
all
then is
the
this yeah,
criteria and metrics that we're looking at?
is this a traditional heavyweight, or is this breaking new ground? Is this a Kokofu winner, or is this gonna get lapped at in Japan, but then be something aesthetically that I'm really proud of at the same time? Like, You
All
know,
good
it
questions.
does. Yeah, it comes to a point where I feel like you get to a point where it's just like you kind of top out, and then you have to pick the parameters to put one tree above the other, but you dial in those parameters, and that preference changes, and so you get to, like, you could get it down to maybe 5 trees, but at that point, all 5 of those trees are the top of some parameter, you know?
Yeah,
It's just change the game, you change the winner.
for sure. Well, with my bonsai, it's a whole different thing because like basically what I realized is I can only keep a certain amount of trees, and that number is like right around 20. And so I do think for me personally, there's value in understanding the rank of my trees because I have to be if I buy a new tree because I'm at the 20 mark now, right? I have to be willing to get rid of one. And so
Mhm.
I have to
I
know
guess
where
it's a
they
lot
sit.
easier to rank disappointment. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, it's a lot easier to be like, "Yeah, that was the one that I wasn't the proudest of."
for
That
sure.
wasn't the most successful thing I did. That is pretty easy. That I can do all day long, you know? But
Yeah,
those top ones
the
are
top
are
ones is
tough
tough. Yeah,
or impossible. That's a debate.
for sure, for sure. Cool. Let's see. You know, uh, we got other questions. However, some of these we've definitely reviewed already. Just like some of them were kind of around uh, your previous inspiration and kind of your background, which I feel like we touched on quite a bit of that during the first
Mhm.
episode.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah,
Yeah,
one of
not
these
to
is. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I kinda gotta run in, like, probably 5 or 10. We got a school auction to attend
Ah,
tonight.
very nice, very
Um,
nice,
so
awesome.
not to
Well,
put a pressure on things, but yeah,
let's wrap it
you wanna
up
do
then.
we could do 1 or 2 more, but yeah, we should probably wrap it up if that's possible.
Let's totally wrap it up. No, hey, Austin, I really, really appreciate you talking with me and building now 3 stands for me. You've been, so awesome to work with. It's been such a fun collaborative process. I just think your work is absolutely phenomenal. We're very I've said this before. You're one of the American bonsai national treasures. We gotta protect you at all costs. I hope you heal up from your surgery really quick, really soon. Yeah, I'm sorry you went through all that, but we need you back making stands. Uh
Well, good news is I'll be bulletproof after the surgery, so once the mesh is ingrained, it doesn't break.
That's great to
So,
hear. Yeah,
we achieved something through the pain. So yeah, better now than the middle of next year when everything's crazy. That was kind of the thought process. So
that
yeah,
makes a lot of
thanks. It's
sense.
always
Yeah,
great to work, and I'm happy I get to participate in this world. As someone who practiced bonsai as a hobby, to be able to do it in any professional capacity is really exciting and fun. So totally, totally happy where things sit.
awesome. Well, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. You're always welcome here on this podcast. And so I hope, at some point we can do it again. But thank you so much for everything. Really appreciate it, Austin. And have fun at the auction.
Yeah, thanks.
All
Awesome.
right.
Yep.
Take care.
Nice chat. You too. Bye.